Pregnant German Shepherd. Begged a baby to open the door. What happened next? Left. Everyone in tears. The story you're about to listen will touch your heart in ways you never thought possible. A moment of kindness that changed lives forever and revealed an incredible secret. Make sure to like, share, and let us know where you're watching from. Thunder crashed against the windows as lightning split the dark sky. Rain pounded mercilessly against the roof of the small suburban home where 5-year-old Oliver, Ollie to everyone who knew him, pressed his tiny hands against the cool glass of the front door. His blue eyes widened with each flash of lightning that illuminated the front yard, casting eerie shadows across the porch. "Ollie, honey, please come away from the door," his mother, Grace, called from the kitchen, where she was preparing a late dinner. Her husband, Mark, was working the night shift at the local hospital, leaving her alone with their curious son during one of the worst storms of the season. "But Mommy, the sky is angry," Ollie whispered, not taking his eyes off the spectacle outside. Another crack of thunder made him jump, but instead of running back to his mother, he leaned closer to the door. "It's pretty." Grace wiped her hands on a dish towel and walked over, her nurse's instinct to protect kicking in. "It's dangerous is what it is. Come on, let's finish setting the table. Daddy will be home soon." A flash of lightning brighter than the others made both of them blink. In that split second of illumination, Ollie thought he saw something move on their porch. He squinted, pressing his forehead against the glass door panel, his breath creating small clouds of fog on the surface. "Did you see that, Mommy?" he asked, his voice small but excited. Grace sighed. "It's just the storm playing tricks on your eyes, sweetheart. Now please." Her words were cut off by another sound, something different from the howling wind and crashing thunder. A soft scratching noise, barely audible, came from the other side of the door. Then a whimper, so faint that if the wind had picked up at that moment, they might have missed it entirely. Ollie's heart raced. "Someone's out there, Mommy," he whispered, his eyes growing wider. Grace paused, listening intently as the scratching came again, more urgent this time. A mother's caution battled with concern as she placed a protective hand on Ollie's shoulder. "Stand back, honey," she said, moving him gently behind her as she peered through the glass panel. The porch light flickered, casting a weak glow into the stormy night. At first, Grace saw nothing. Then a shape moved from the shadows. A large dog, its fur soaked and matted from the rain. It was a German shepherd, shivering violently as it stood on their porch. Even in the dim light, Grace could see its swollen belly. The dog was pregnant and looked to be near her time. "Who's there?" Ollie called out, peeking around his mother's legs. When he saw the dog, he gasped. "Mommy, look! A doggy! She's all wet!" The German shepherd's ears perked up at the sound of the child's voice. She whined softly, her brown eyes looking directly at Ollie with an intelligence that made Grace's breath catch. The dog lifted a paw and scratched at the door again, her movements slow and deliberate, as if trying to communicate. "She wants to come in," Ollie said matter-of-factly, already reaching for the doorknob. Grace quickly grabbed his hand. "No, Ollie. We don't know if she's dangerous." "But she's asking for help," Ollie protested, his lower lip trembling. "Look at her eyes, Mommy. She's scared." Grace looked again, and the dog met her gaze. There was something in those eyes, not aggression or wildness, but a desperate plea. The dog whimpered again, pawing at the door as another flash of lightning illuminated the sky, followed by a deafening crash of thunder. The German shepherd flinched visibly, pressing herself against the door. "She's afraid of the storm," Ollie said, tears welling in his eyes. "Please, Mommy, we have to help her." Grace felt torn. Her nursing instincts urged her to help the suffering animal, but her mother's instinct to protect her child held her back. "Let me call Daddy," she said, pulling out her phone. The call connected, but Mark's voice was hard to hear over the background noise of the busy emergency room. "Grace? Everything okay?" "There's a dog on our porch," Grace explained, keeping her eyes on the German shepherd, who hadn't moved from the door. "A German shepherd. She looks pregnant, Mark, and she's soaking wet from the storm." "Is she aggressive, barking, growling?" Mark asked, his voice becoming clearer as he presumably moved to a quieter area. "No, she's just waiting, looking at us, whimpering a little. And scratching," Ollie added loudly, wanting his father to understand the urgency. Grace continued. Ollie wants to let her in, but I'm not sure if it's safe. She could be someone's pet who got loose in the storm. She doesn't have a collar, Mark asked. Grace looked closer. Wait, she does have a collar, but I can't see a tag from here. There was a pause as Mark considered the situation. Well, if she's not showing any signs of aggression, and especially if she's pregnant, she might need help. Just be careful, okay? Keep Ollie back at first. Mark, are you sure? What if... Trust your instincts, Grace. You're good with animals, always have been, and if she's in trouble... Grace knew her husband was right. She couldn't leave a pregnant animal out in a storm like this, not when the dog was clearly asking for help. Okay, I'll be careful. I'll call you back. She hung up and looked down at Ollie, whose hopeful expression tugged at her heart. We'll let her in, she said firmly, but you need to stay behind me, okay? Promise me. Ollie nodded solemnly. I promise, Mommy. And if I tell you to go to your room, you go right away. No questions. Okay, Mommy. Grace took a deep breath and knelt to Ollie's level. Sometimes animals that are scared can be dangerous without meaning to be. Like when you accidentally knocked over that boy at school because you were running too fast, remember? You didn't mean to hurt him, but he still got hurt. Ollie nodded, his face serious. I know, Mommy, but she's not scary. She's just a mama who needs help. Out of the mouths of babes, Grace thought, amazed at her son's intuition and compassion. She stood up, one hand still firmly on Ollie's shoulder, and approached the door. The German Shepherd hadn't moved, her eyes still fixed on them, patient but desperate. As Grace reached for the doorknob, she spoke softly through the glass. It's okay, girl. We're going to help you. The moment the door cracked open, a gust of wind and rain swept in. The German Shepherd didn't rush forward as Grace had half expected. Instead, she waited, shivering, her eyes moving from Grace to Ollie and back again. Come on, girl, Grace encouraged, opening the door wider but keeping Ollie safely behind her. The dog took one tentative step forward, then another. As she crossed the threshold into the warm house, her legs suddenly seemed to give out. She collapsed onto the entryway rug, her wet body heaving with exhaustion. Up close, Grace could see that the dog was even more pregnant than she'd first thought. Her belly was enormous, stretched tight with puppies that could come any day. Mommy, is she hurt? Ollie cried, trying to wiggle past Grace to reach the dog. Stay back, honey, Grace warned, though her concern was mounting. The dog wasn't showing any signs of aggression, quite the opposite. She looked utterly spent, as if she'd been running for miles through the storm. Grace cautiously knelt beside the German Shepherd, keeping one arm extended to block Ollie. Easy, girl, she murmured. The dog lifted her head slightly, her brown eyes full of what could only be described as relief. She let out a soft whine and, to Grace's astonishment, extended her paw as if in greeting or thanks. Ollie giggled. She's saying thank you, Mommy. She knows we're helping her. Grace slowly reached out to examine the dog's collar. It was a simple leather band, worn and slightly frayed, but there was no ID tag attached, just an empty metal ring where a tag might once have hung. No identification, she said, gently running her hand over the dog's wet fur. The German Shepherd didn't flinch at her touch. Instead, she seemed to relax slightly, her breathing becoming less labored. We need to dry her off, Grace decided, standing up. Ollie, can you go get some old towels from the laundry room? The ones in the bottom drawer. Excited to help, Ollie nodded and ran off, his tiny footsteps echoing down the hallway. Grace took the opportunity to examine the dog more closely. Despite being soaked and exhausted, the German Shepherd appeared to be well-bred and had likely been someone's beloved pet. Her coat, though dirty and matted from the rain, showed signs of the previous care, but something caught Grace's eye, a patch of fur on the dog's side that looked different. She gently parted the wet hair to reveal a partially healed wound, about 3 inches long. What happened to you, girl? Grace whispered, her nursing training kicking in as she assessed the injury. It wasn't fresh, but wasn't completely healed either, perhaps a week or 2 old. It didn't appear infected, thankfully, but it did look like it had been a deep cut at one point. Ollie returned, his arms full of mismatched towels. I brought the blue ones and the yellow ones, he announced proudly. The blue ones are softer. That's perfect, honey, thank you. Grace took a towel and began to gently pat the dog dry, careful to avoid the area with the wound. We need to be very gentle, Ollie. She has an OE on her side. Ollie's face fell. Someone hurt her? Grace hesitated, unsure how to explain. "We don't know for sure. She might have gotten hurt by accident." The German Shepherd watched them with those intelligent eyes, seemingly understanding that they were trying to help. As Grace dried her, the dog's shivering gradually subsided. "Can I help, Mommy?" Ollie asked, clutching a yellow towel to his chest. Grace considered for a moment. The dog had shown no signs of aggression, and Ollie was being so brave and responsible. "Yes, but be very gentle, okay? Just like I showed you with Mrs. Peterson's cat." Ollie nodded solemnly and knelt down beside the dog. With extreme care, he began to pat the dog's back with his towel. "It's okay," he whispered to the dog. "You're safe now. The scary storm can't get you in here." To Grace's amazement, the German Shepherd turned her head toward Ollie and gently licked his hand once, as if thanking him. Ollie's face lit up with delight. "Mommy, she kissed me." Grace couldn't help but smile. "I think she likes you, honey." "Can we keep her?" Ollie asked immediately, his eyes bright with hope. "Ollie, she probably belongs to someone who's missing her very much," Grace explained gently, though she had her doubts given the lack of ID tags and the suspicious wound. "We'll take care of her tonight and then try to find her family tomorrow." Ollie looked down at the dog, who was now resting her head on her paws, her eyes still watching them closely. "What if she doesn't have a family anymore?" he asked, his voice small. Grace's heart clenched at the question. "Everyone has a family somewhere, sweetheart," she said, though even as she spoke the words, she wondered if they were true for this particular dog. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway made them both look up. The German Shepherd's ears perked up immediately, and a low growl rumbled in her throat, the first sign of anything other than desperate gratitude she'd shown since arriving. "It's just Daddy," Grace reassured both Ollie and the dog, though she placed a protective hand on her son's shoulder just in case. "He's coming home from work." The front door opened and Mark stepped in, soaking wet despite the umbrella clutched in his hand. "Storm's getting worse," he announced, shaking water from his jacket. He stopped short when he saw the German Shepherd on their entryway rug. "So, you did let her in?" The dog's growl had subsided, but she was watching Mark warily, her body tense. "It's okay, girl," Grace soothed. "This is Mark. He's family." Mark slowly crouched down, extending his hand palm up for the dog to sniff. "Hey there," he said softly. "You've had quite a night, haven't you?" After a moment's hesitation, the German Shepherd stretched her neck forward to sniff his hand. Whatever she sensed must have satisfied her, because she relaxed again, though her eyes remained alert. "She let us dry her, Daddy," Ollie said proudly. "And she has puppies in her tummy." Mark smiled at his son's excitement, but gave Grace a questioning look. "Any ID?" Grace shook her head. "Collar, but no tags. And she has a wound on her side that looks like it might have been deliberately inflicted. It's partially healed, but still concerning." Mark's expression darkened. As a doctor, he had unfortunately seen his share of animal abuse cases when pet owners brought in animals that had been attacked. "Let me take a look." He moved carefully, making sure the dog could see what he was doing, and examined the wound on her side. "You're right," he said quietly to Grace. "This doesn't look like an accident. Too clean, too deliberate." He glanced down at the dog's swollen belly. "And she's very pregnant. I'd say days away from delivery, if not sooner." "Can we give her some food, Daddy?" Ollie asked, still patting the dog's back gently. "She might be hungry after being in the storm." "Good idea, buddy," Mark said, straightening up. "We probably have some chicken in the fridge she could eat." As Mark went to the kitchen, Grace noticed the German Shepherd watching him go, her eyes tracking his movements with an intensity that seemed almost human in its awareness. There was something about this dog that went beyond the usual animal intelligence. She seemed to be constantly assessing, thinking. "What should we call her, Mommy?" Ollie asked, stroking the now mostly dry fur on the dog's neck. "Well," Grace said thoughtfully, "we shouldn't get too attached, honey. She might have a name already and a family looking for her." "But we have to call her something," Ollie insisted. "We can't just say dog all the time." Grace smiled at her son's logic. "You're right. What do you think we should call her?" Ollie studied the German Shepherd's face seriously. The dog looked back at him, her brown eyes calm but somehow sad. "Mila," he declared after a moment. "She looks like a Mila." "Mila?" Grace repeated, surprised by the somewhat unusual choice. "Where did you hear that name?" "From my book about the brave princess who saved her kingdom," Ollie explained. Princess Mila was lost in the forest, but found her way home. This Mila found her way to us. Grace was once again struck by her son's intuition. Mila it is then, at least for now. Mark returned with a plate of shredded chicken. Here we go, he said, placing it on the floor near the dog. Let's see if she's hungry. Mila sniffed the plate cautiously, then began to eat with controlled urgency, clearly hungry, but not frantic or aggressive about the food. She has good manners, Mark observed. Definitely someone's pet at some point. As they watched Mila eat, the storm outside intensified. A particularly loud crash of thunder made the lights flicker, and Mila's head shot up, her food temporarily forgotten as she stared intently at the front door. It's just the storm, Grace soothed, but Mila wasn't looking at the ceiling where the thunder had originated. Her focus was fixed on the door, her ears forward, alert. A chill ran down Grace's spine. Mark, she whispered, I don't think it's the storm she's worried about. Mark followed Mila's gaze to the door, then moved to peek through the window beside it. The porch light illuminated sheets of rain, but nothing else was visible. I don't see anything, he said, but there was a note of uncertainty in his voice. Mila had abandoned her food entirely now and was struggling to stand up, her pregnant belly making the effort difficult. Once on her feet, she moved to position herself between Ollie and the door, her body language protective rather than threatening. Mila's scared again, Ollie said, wrapping his arms around the dog's neck. Don't worry, Mila, you're safe here. But as another flash of lightning lit up the night, all three humans froze. For just a split second, a silhouette was visible on their front lawn. A human figure standing motionless in the pouring rain, watching their house. When the darkness returned, Mila let out a low, warning growl that made the hair on the back of Grace's neck stand up. Whoever was out there, Mila knew them. And she was afraid. Mark quickly locked the door and pulled the curtains closed. Everyone away from the windows, he instructed, his voice low but firm. Grace scooped Ollie into her arms while Mark checked that all the doors and windows in the house were secure. Mila remained focused on the front door, her body tense and alert despite her exhaustion and pregnant condition. The family huddled in the living room, the storm still raging outside, but now with the added fear of an unknown watcher. Should we call the police? Grace whispered, holding Ollie close. Mark glanced out through a small gap in the curtains. There's no one visible now. Could have been someone looking for shelter from the storm. Then why didn't they knock? Why just stand there? Grace countered, her nurse's instinct for danger still prickling at the back of her neck. Ollie, sensing the tension, stroked Mila's head. Don't worry, Daddy will protect us, he whispered to the dog. As if understanding his words, Mila finally turned away from the door and settled beside Ollie, her large body positioned protectively near the boy. Her eyes, however, still darted occasionally toward the door. Let's try to get some sleep, Mark suggested after half an hour had passed, with no further signs of the mysterious figure. I'll stay up and keep watch for a while. You take Ollie to bed. Grace nodded, though sleep seemed impossible now. Come on, sweetie, bedtime. Ollie looked down at Mila. Can she sleep in my room? She's scared. Grace exchanged a glance with Mark, who shrugged slightly. Just for tonight, she agreed. To everyone's surprise, Mila followed them upstairs without hesitation, as if she'd been invited into their home 100 times before. When they reached Ollie's bedroom, the dog circled once, then settled heavily on the rug beside his bed. See, Mommy? She knows where to sleep, Ollie said, as Grace tucked him in. I see that, Grace replied, amazed at how quickly the dog had adapted to their home. Try to get some sleep now, okay? Ollie yawned, the excitement of the evening finally catching up with him. Okay, Mommy. Good night, Mila, he added, reaching down to pat the dog's head one last time. Grace kissed her son's forehead and left the room, leaving the door slightly ajar. She paused outside, watching as Mila lifted her head to look at the sleeping child, then laid back down with a deep sigh that sounded almost human in its weariness. Downstairs, Mark was peering out the window again. No sign of anyone, he reported when Grace joined him. Storm's easing up a bit, though. Grace sank onto the couch, the events of the evening finally catching up with her. What do you make of all this, Mark? That dog showing up on our doorstep, the wound on her side, the person outside. Mark sat beside her, his face serious. I don't know, but I don't think it's a coincidence. That dog, Mila, she came here for a reason. She picked our house. But why? And who was watching us? Grace shuddered at the memory of the silhouette in the lightning flash. Mark put his arm around her shoulders. We'll figure it out in the morning. For now, let's just be glad we could help her. She's safe, at least for tonight. Grace nodded, leaning against her husband's strong shoulder. I just hope we did the right thing letting her in. Neither of them voiced what they were both thinking, that by helping Mila, they might have invited trouble to their doorstep. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the storm leaving behind only puddles and scattered branches as evidence of its fury. Grace woke early, momentarily confused by the events of the previous night, until the memory of the wet German shepherd on their doorstep came flooding back. She climbed out of bed, careful not to wake Mark, who had finally fallen asleep in the early hours of the morning, and headed to Ollie's room to check on him. She pushed the door open gently and froze at the sight before her. Ollie was still fast asleep, but Mila was awake, her intelligent brown eyes immediately locking onto Grace. During the night, the pregnant dog had somehow managed to climb onto the bed and was now curled protectively around Ollie, her body forming a warm barrier between the child and the door. Instead of feeling alarmed at finding a strange dog in bed with her son, Grace felt an unexpected wave of comfort. Something told her that Mila would sooner hurt herself than allow any harm to come to Ollie. "Morning, Mila," she whispered. The dog's tail thumped once against the bed in greeting, but she didn't move from her position beside Ollie. Grace smiled and headed downstairs to start breakfast, figuring the exciting events of the previous night warranted pancakes. She was halfway through mixing the batter when a sharp yelp from upstairs made her drop the spoon with a clatter. She raced up the stairs, heart pounding, only to find Ollie's door open and the boy standing beside his bed, eyes wide with concern. "Mommy, something's wrong with Mila," he cried. Grace rushed to the dog's side. Mila was on her side on the bed, panting heavily, her pregnant belly visibly contracting. "Oh my goodness," Grace gasped. Mark, get in here," she called over her shoulder, not taking her eyes off the laboring dog. Mark appeared in the doorway seconds later, his hair disheveled from sleep. One look at Mila told him everything. "She's going into labor," he confirmed. "Is she having her babies now?" Ollie asked, his voice a mixture of fear and excitement. "Yes, honey, I think she is," Grace answered, her nursing instincts kicking in. "Mark, we need towels, lots of them, and warm water." Mark nodded and dashed off to gather supplies. Grace turned to Ollie. "Sweetie, Mila is going to need a quiet place to have her puppies. Can you help Daddy get the things we need?" Ollie nodded eagerly, relieved to have a task. "Will Mila be okay?" Grace stroked the dog's head gently. Mila's eyes were filled with pain, but also trust. "Yes, I think she will. She's very brave and strong. Now, go help Daddy, okay?" Once Ollie had left, Grace quickly assessed the situation. Mila's contractions were coming regularly, and the dog was surprisingly calm despite the pain, almost as if she knew Grace was there to help. "You picked the right house, didn't you?" Grace murmured, remembering her nursing training. While humans and dogs were different, the basics of labor weren't dissimilar. "Your puppies are coming, and we're going to help you through this." Mark returned with an armload of towels, followed by Ollie carefully carrying a bowl of warm water. "I didn't spill a drop," the boy announced proudly. "That's perfect, buddy. Put it right there," Mark instructed, helping him place the bowl on the nightstand. "Now, let's move Mila to the floor where she'll be more comfortable." Together, they gently lifted the pregnant dog onto a nest of towels on the carpet. Mila whimpered but didn't resist, seeming to understand their intentions. "Can I stay and watch?" Ollie asked, his eyes round with wonder. Grace and Mark exchanged glances. "Yes, but you have to be very quiet and calm," Grace decided. "Mila needs to concentrate on having her puppies." Ollie nodded solemnly and sat cross-legged a short distance away, watching as Mila's contractions intensified. Grace knelt beside the dog, stroking her head and speaking soft words of encouragement. After what seemed like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, Mila's contractions reached their peak. The dog strained, her body tensing with effort. "Here comes the first one," Mark observed, his medical training evident in his calm demeanor. As if on cue, a small dark sac emerged. Within moments, Mila had turned to nip at the membrane, freeing a tiny wet puppy. Instinctively, she began to clean it with her tongue. "It's so small," Ollie whispered in awe as the first puppy, barely larger than his hand, began to move weakly. "That's puppy number 1, Grace smiled, checking that the little one was breathing properly. "Good job, Mila." The German Shepherd looked up at her briefly before returning to her cleaning duties, ensuring the newborn's airway was clear. The second puppy arrived more quickly, and Mila efficiently cleaned it too. But when the third puppy emerged, something was wrong. The tiny body lay motionless, still enclosed in its sack. Mila whined anxiously, nudging the unmoving puppy with her nose. When it didn't respond, she looked up at Grace with such a human expression of desperation that Grace's heart clenched. "Mark," she whispered urgently, "the third one isn't moving." Mark immediately moved in, gently taking the tiny puppy and carefully removing the membrane. "It's not breathing," he confirmed, his voice low to avoid alarming Ollie. "Do something, Daddy!" Ollie pleaded, tears welling in his eyes. He had crept closer, unable to stay back when he sensed something was wrong. Mark didn't waste time responding. With gentle but firm movements, he began to massage the puppy's tiny chest, using just his fingertips to stimulate its heart. Grace held her breath, watching as her husband worked to save the little life. Mila was watching too, her attention divided between her 2 active puppies and the silent third one in Mark's hands. She whined softly, her eyes never leaving the small, still form. Seconds ticked by, feeling like hours. Just when Grace was beginning to lose hope, a miracle happened. The tiny puppy twitched once, then again. Its small mouth opened, and a barely audible squeak emerged. "It's alive!" Ollie cried, his face lighting up with joy. Mark continued the gentle chest massage until the puppy was breathing steadily on its own. "There we go, little fighter," he murmured, carefully placing the revived puppy next to its mother. Mila immediately began to clean it, her movements somehow conveying both relief and gratitude. The puppy, though smaller than its siblings, began to squirm with increasing strength. "You saved it, Daddy!" Ollie threw his arms around his father's neck. Mark hugged his son, his eyes meeting Grace's over the boy's shoulder. The unspoken message was clear. This was just the beginning of a longer journey with Mila and her puppies. As if to confirm this thought, Mila suddenly tensed again. "There's another one coming," Grace announced, turning her attention back to the laboring dog. The 4th puppy arrived without complications, and like the others, immediately began seeking its mother's warmth and milk. Mila seemed more relaxed now, settling into her role as a new mother with 4 tiny lives depending on her. "I think that's all of them," Mark said after several minutes had passed with no further contractions from Mila. Grace nodded, gently checking Mila's belly. "I agree. 4 beautiful puppies." She looked at the little family with a smile. "You did so well, Mila." Ollie was captivated by the tiny squirming bundles nestled against their mother. "They're so cute. Can I touch them?" Very gently, Grace cautioned. "Just a light stroke with one finger. They're very fragile right now." With exquisite care, Ollie reached out to touch the closest puppy. "So soft," he whispered, his face filled with wonder. He looked up at Mila. "You're a good mama, Mila." The German Shepherd's tail thumped weakly against the floor, her eyes heavy with exhaustion, but filled with maternal pride. "I think they need names," Ollie declared, looking at each puppy in turn. Mark chuckled. "Already getting attached, I see." Ollie pointed to the first puppy, which had a dark coat like its mother. "This one is Toby," he announced confidently. "And why Toby?" Grace asked, smiling at her son's immediate connection to the puppies. "Because he's brave like my friend Toby at school," Ollie explained. He moved on to the second puppy, which had lighter markings around its face. "This one is Willow, because she's soft like the willow tree in our backyard." Grace exchanged an amused glance with Mark. They had never discussed how to tell male and female puppies apart with Ollie, but somehow he seemed to sense which was which. "And this one," Ollie continued, gently touching the revived puppy, "is Sunny, because he fought to come back to the sunny world." "That's perfect," Mark agreed, clearly moved by his son's intuitive naming. "And the last one is—" Ollie studied the 4th puppy thoughtfully. It was the smallest of the litter, but had been surprisingly vocal since birth. "Luna, because she was born after the storm, when the moon came out." Grace was about to point out that they couldn't see the moon from Ollie's bedroom window when she realized he was right. The The storm had cleared, and through the gap in the curtains, the faint outline of the morning moon was visible in the bright sky. "Those are beautiful names," she said instead, wondering not for the first time at her son's unexpected perceptiveness. Mila seemed content with the names too, her eyes closing briefly in exhaustion before opening again to check on her puppies. But Grace noticed something odd. Even in her weakened state, Mila kept glancing toward the bedroom door, as if expecting or fearing someone's arrival. Mark noticed it too. "She's still on edge about something," he murmured to Grace. "Even after giving birth." Grace nodded, remembering the mysterious figure from the night before. "Do you think we should call animal control or the police?" Mark considered this. "Let's give her a day to recover first. Separating her from her puppies now would be traumatic for all of them. Besides," he added, lowering his voice further, "if someone is looking for her, I'm not sure I want to advertise that she's here until we know more." His words sent a chill down Grace's spine, but she knew he was right. Something about Mila's arrival, the wound on her side, and the shadowy figure watching their house suggested that this was more than a simple case of a lost pet. "We should check her collar again," Grace suggested. "Maybe we missed something." While Ollie was distracted counting each puppy's tiny toes, Mark carefully examined Mila's collar. The leather was worn, but of good quality. As he turned it, something caught his eye, a small, almost imperceptible pocket sewn into the inside of the collar. "Grace," he whispered, "look at this." With nimble fingers, he worked open the tiny pocket and extracted a small, folded piece of paper. It was damp from Mila's time in the rain, but the writing was still legible, a phone number and 2 words. "Help us." Grace's heart raced as they stared at the note. "Mark, what have we gotten into?" Before he could answer, Mila suddenly raised her head, her ears perked forward in alert. A low growl rumbled in her throat as she stared at the bedroom door, her body tensing despite her exhaustion and the puppies nursing at her side. Seconds later, they heard it too, the unmistakable sound of someone trying the front door handle downstairs. "Stay here with Mila and the puppies," Mark whispered, his face tense. "Lock the bedroom door behind me." Ollie, sensing the sudden fear in the room, pressed himself against Grace's side. "Mommy, who's at our door?" he asked, his voice small. "We don't know yet, sweetheart," Grace answered, trying to keep her voice steady as she pulled him closer. "But Daddy will check." Mark moved to the door, pausing to grab a baseball bat from Ollie's closet. He gave Grace a meaningful look before slipping out. She immediately locked the door behind him, then gathered Ollie in her arms and moved to sit beside Mila and her puppies. The German Shepherd was fully alert now, her maternal exhaustion temporarily forgotten, as she positioned herself between her puppies and the door. Her growl was low and continuous, barely audible but filled with warning. "It's okay, Mila," Grace whispered, though her own heart was racing. She strained to hear what was happening downstairs. Mark's footsteps were cautious on the stairs. Then came the sound of his voice, too distant to make out the words but firm in tone. Another voice responded, a man's voice, unfamiliar and insistent. Ollie looked up at his mother with wide eyes. "Is the bad person here?" he whispered. Before Grace could answer, Mila's growl intensified. The dog was staring at the window now, not the door. With a chill, Grace realized what that might mean. There might be more than one person outside. She reached for her phone and quickly dialed 911, keeping her voice low as she explained the situation to the dispatcher. "Someone tried to enter our home. We have a dog that seems afraid of them. Yes, we'll stay on the line." More voices drifted up from downstairs now. Mark's was louder, more insistent. The stranger's voice rose in response, demanding something. Then came the sound that made Grace's blood freeze, the distinct crash of breaking glass. Ollie whimpered, and Grace held him tighter. "It's going to be okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was trying to convince him or herself. The dispatcher's voice came through the phone, calm but urgent. "Officers are on their way. Stay where you are. Can you still hear your husband?" Grace strained to listen. The voices downstairs had stopped, replaced by the sound of movement. Shuffling footsteps, something scraping across the floor. "I can't tell," she answered, her voice shaking. "There was glass breaking, and now I just hear movement." "Mrs. Crawford? Grace?" Mark's voice, calling up the stairs. Grace felt a surge of relief. "Mark, are you okay?" "I'm fine," he called back. "It's safe to come down now. The The police are here. Grace hesitated, something in Mark's tone sounding off. Mila clearly felt it too. The dog's growl hadn't subsided. If anything, it had intensified. "Mrs. Crawford, is everything okay?" the dispatcher asked. "I'm not sure," Grace admitted. "My husband says it's safe, but—" "Trust your instincts, ma'am," the dispatcher advised. "Officers should be arriving any moment." As if on cue, the distant wail of sirens became audible, growing louder by the second. Almost immediately, the atmosphere in the house changed. Heavy footsteps pounded across the floor downstairs, followed by the slam of the back door. "Grace! Ollie!" Mark's voice came again, this time filled with genuine urgency. "It's okay. He ran off when he heard the sirens." The bedroom door rattled as Mark tried the handle. "Grace, open up. It's me." "Mommy?" Ollie looked at her questioningly. Grace glanced at Mila, who had stopped growling and was now watching the door with alert but not hostile eyes. Taking this as a sign, Grace moved to unlock the door. Mark burst in, his face pale but unharmed. "Are you all okay?" Grace threw her arms around him, Ollie squeezing between them. "We're fine. What happened? Who was it?" Mark shook his head, his expression grim. "A man asking about a lost dog. Said his pregnant German shepherd ran away during last night's storm. When I said we hadn't seen any dog, he tried to push past me to search the house himself." Grace's eyes widened. "Did he say his name?" "Called himself Miller, but when I asked for ID or proof the dog was his, he got aggressive. That's when he broke the window in the door, trying to reach in and unlock it." The sound of car doors slamming announced the arrival of the police. Mark squeezed Grace's hand. "Stay here. I'll talk to them." As Mark left to meet the officers, Grace turned back to Mila. The German shepherd had calmed somewhat, but was still watchful, her body curved protectively around her puppies. "That man was looking for you, wasn't he?" Grace whispered, stroking Mila's head. "But you're afraid of him. Why?" Mila's intelligent eyes met hers, full of what seemed like understanding, but unable to share the secrets she knew. Ollie sat down next to the dog family, gently petting each puppy. "Mila came to us because she knew we would help her," he said, with the simple certainty of a child. "The bad man hurt her, and she ran away." Grace was struck by how accurately her son had likely summed up the situation. She pulled out the note they had found in Mila's collar. "Help us," it said. Not "help me," but "us." Mila and her puppies, perhaps? Or was there more to this story? Voices drifted up from downstairs as Mark explained the situation to the police. After a few minutes, footsteps approached the bedroom, and Mark appeared in the doorway with two uniformed officers. "Ma'am," the older officer greeted her with a nod. "I'm Officer Reyes, and this is Officer Bennett. Your husband tells us you've had an unwelcome visitor." Grace nodded, instinctively moving closer to Mila and the puppies. "He said he was looking for his dog." Officer Bennett, a younger woman with sharp eyes, studied Mila thoughtfully. "And I'm guessing this is the dog in question?" "She showed up during the storm last night," Grace explained. "Pregnant and injured. She just gave birth this morning." "Injured how?" Officer Reyes asked, his expression hardening slightly. Mark stepped forward. "She has a partially healed wound on her side that looks deliberately inflicted." Officer Bennett knelt down to get a better look at Mila, keeping a respectful distance. "May I?" Grace nodded, and Bennett moved closer, extending her hand for Mila to sniff. The German shepherd remained calm but watchful. "Good girl," Bennett murmured, gently examining the wound on Mila's side. "This was no accident," she confirmed, looking up at her partner. "And this so-called owner who showed up, did he give a first name?" "Just Miller," Mark replied. "No ID, no proof of ownership. He described a pregnant German shepherd, but got aggressive when I wouldn't just let him in to search." Officer Reyes was making notes. "Did you get a good look at him? Vehicle details?" Mark described a middle-aged man with dark hair and a beard, wearing a gray jacket. "I didn't see a vehicle. He must have parked down the street." "We found this in her collar," Grace added, handing over the damp note with the phone number and plea for help. Both officers studied it with interest. "We'll run this number right away," Reyes said, taking out his phone. "There's something else?" Grace added hesitantly. "Last night, during the storm, we thought we saw someone watching the house." Mila reacted strongly, like she knew who it was. The officers exchanged significant looks. "I don't like this," Reyes said to his partner. "First a dog shows up injured with a hidden cry for help, then a suspicious character comes looking for her and gets violent when denied." Bennett nodded, turning back to the family. "We're going to need to take a formal statement and file a report on the break-in attempt. And regarding the dog..." Grace tensed, instinctively placing a protective hand on Mila's head. "Yes?" "Normally, we'd take her to animal services to check for a microchip, try to find the legitimate owner," Bennett explained. "But given the circumstances..." "She just had puppies," Ollie interjected, his voice uncharacteristically firm for a 5-year-old. "You can't take her away from her babies." Bennett smiled gently at the boy. "You're absolutely right, young man. Moving her and the newborns right now would be risky. Besides," she added, her expression turning serious as she looked at her partner, "if someone is after this dog, animal services might be the first place they'd check." Reyes nodded, then stepped aside to make his call. After a brief conversation, he returned, his face grave. "The number traces back to a woman named Lily Mercer, reported missing 3 weeks ago." A stunned silence fell over the room. Mila, as if sensing the shift in atmosphere, whined softly. "Missing?" Grace repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Last seen walking her German Shepherd in River Park," Reyes confirmed. "The dog wasn't found either. Until now, apparently." Ollie looked confused. "Who's Lily? Is she Mila's real mom?" Mark knelt beside his son. "Not her mom, buddy, but maybe her owner, her human family." Bennett was studying Mila with new intensity. "This changes things. The dog is now potential evidence in a missing persons case." She turned to her partner. "We need to notify Detective Harper." Reyes nodded in agreement. "In the meantime, we should increase patrols in this neighborhood. If the suspect returns..." "You think he will?" Grace asked, fear creeping back into her voice. "People who hurt animals and potentially harm humans rarely give up easily," Bennett said grimly. "But we'll have officers keeping an eye on your house." "What about Mila and her puppies?" Mark asked. "If she's evidence, do you need to take them?" "As Officer Bennett mentioned, moving newborn puppies isn't advisable," Reyes replied. "For now, the best place for them is here. But we will need photos of the dog, her injury, and the puppies for our report." Bennett looked at the family seriously. "Would you be willing to temporarily foster them until we sort this out? It would be a great help to our investigation, but I understand it's asking a lot." "Yes!" Ollie exclaimed before his parents could respond. "We'll take care of them." Grace and Mark exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Despite the danger and uncertainty, neither could bear the thought of sending Mila and her puppies away. "We'll keep them safe," Mark confirmed, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "Thank you," Bennett said sincerely. "A detective will be in touch soon to follow up. In the meantime, we'll have a patrol car stationed nearby." After taking photos and gathering additional details for their report, the officers prepared to leave. At the bedroom door, Bennett paused, looking back at Mila and her puppies with a thoughtful expression. "You know," she said quietly, "in my years on the force, I've seen many cases where animals led us to solve crimes. They sense things we don't, remember things we miss. This dog came to your house for a reason. She chose you." With those words lingering in the air, the officers departed, leaving the family to process the startling turn of events. "A missing woman," Grace whispered once they were alone. "Mila's owner. Do you think this Miller person is responsible?" Mark ran a hand through his hair, his expression troubled. "It seems likely. Why else would Mila run from him and hide a call for help in her collar?" Ollie, who had been quietly absorbing the adult conversation, looked up at his parents with solemn eyes. "Mila came here to find help for her real mom," he said. "She knew we would listen." The simplicity of his statement struck both parents silent for a moment. Out of the mouths of babes, Grace thought again. "We should try to get some rest," Mark suggested after a while. "It's been an intense morning, and we all need to recharge. The police are watching the house, and we're safe for now." Grace nodded, though rest seemed impossible with so many questions swirling in her mind. Who was Lily Mercer? What had happened to her? And how had Mila escaped, pregnant and injured, to find her way to their doorstep? As if reading her thoughts, Mark squeezed her hand. "One step at a time," he murmured. "First, we take care of Mila and her puppies. Then we help find out what happened to her owner. That afternoon passed in a blur of caring for the new puppies and answering more questions when Detective Harper, a serious woman with kind eyes, arrived to interview them about Mila and the break-in attempt. She examined the note from Mila's caller with particular interest, photographing it for evidence. Lily Mercer was a veterinary technician, Detective Harper informed them. Well-liked, no enemies that anyone knew of. Simply vanished while walking her dog 3 weeks ago. Could this Miller person be someone she knew? Grace asked. We're looking into all possibilities, Harper replied carefully. The fact that her dog has turned up with an injury and a hidden message certainly suggests foul play. Will you find Lily? Ollie asked, his young face serious as he stroked Mila's head. Detective Harper smiled gently at the boy. We're doing everything we can, and thanks to you and your family helping Mila, we have new clues to follow. After the detective left, promising to keep them updated, the family settled into an uneasy evening routine. The presence of a police car parked down the street offered some comfort, but Grace still jumped at every unusual sound. Mark insisted on sleeping in Ollie's room that night, setting up a makeshift bed on the floor near Mila and her puppies. Grace joined them, unwilling to be separated from her family, with the threat of Miller's return hanging over them. As they prepared for bed, Mila suddenly raised her head, ears perked toward the window. She didn't growl this time, but stared intently at the glass as if sensing something beyond. Mark moved cautiously to peek through the curtains. The police car is still there, he reported. Nothing else visible. But Mila remained alert, her body tense despite her exhaustion. She whined softly, looking from the window to the family and back again. She knows something we don't, Grace whispered, that familiar chill returning to her spine. They double-checked all locks and windows before finally settling down to sleep, the events of the day catching up with them at last. Ollie drifted off quickly, nestled between his parents on the floor beside Mila's makeshift nest. In the quiet darkness, Grace found herself watching the German shepherd's silhouette. Even as tired as she must be after giving birth, Mila remained vigilant, her head raising occasionally to listen or sniff the air. You're trying to tell us something more, aren't you? Grace whispered, too softly to wake the others. Mila's eyes, reflecting the faint moonlight filtering through the curtains, met hers. In that gaze, Grace felt she could almost see the story the dog couldn't tell, the fear, the escape, the desperate search for safety. We'll help you find her, Grace promised. You're Lily. We'll bring her home. As if understanding, Mila rested her head on her paws, her eyes still watchful, but somehow more peaceful. Outside, the night remained quiet, but Grace couldn't shake the feeling that this was merely the calm before a storm, that somewhere in the darkness, someone was waiting, watching, planning their next move. What was the connection between the missing Lily Mercer and the man who'd tried to force his way into their home? And what secret was Mila still trying to share with them? Little did they know, the answer lay buried closer than they could have imagined. The family's sleep was fitful at best. Grace woke several times during the night, each time finding Mila still alert, her eyes scanning the darkness as if expecting danger to materialize at any moment. By morning, they were all exhausted but relieved to have made it through the night without incident. Mark called the hospital to request an emergency day off, explaining the situation to his surprised supervisor. Grace did the same with her nursing shift. Neither felt comfortable leaving Ollie and the dogs alone, even with police patrol nearby. I wish Mila could talk, Grace said as they sat around the kitchen table, the German shepherd sleeping beside the back door, finally allowing herself some rest while her puppies napped upstairs. She knows what happened to Lily. Mark nodded, sipping his coffee thoughtfully. Detective Harper said they're getting a search warrant for Miller's property based on the attempted break-in and the connection to Lily's disappearance. Maybe they'll find something there. What if they don't? Grace whispered, mindful of Ollie, who was coloring at the other end of the table, seemingly absorbed in his drawings, but likely absorbing every word. Before Mark could answer, a sharp bark from Mila caught their attention. The German shepherd was suddenly wide awake, standing at the back door, barking with increasing urgency. Is it the bad man again? Ollie asked, dropping his crayon. Mark moved cautiously to the window, peering out into their backyard. I don't see anyone, he reported, frowning. But Mila continued barking, now scratching at the door frantically. Her behavior wasn't aggressive so much as insistent, almost like she was trying to tell them something. Should we let her out? Grace asked uncertainly. What if Miller is waiting somewhere? The police are still watching the front of the house, Mark reminded her, but maybe we should call them first, just to be safe. Ollie had joined them by the door, watching Mila with curiosity. I think she wants to show us something, he said confidently. Remember in my book about Lassie, the dog always tried to make people follow when something was wrong. Grace and Mark exchanged glances. It did seem like Mila was trying to lead them somewhere, not running from a threat. I'll call Officer Bennett, Grace decided, reaching for her phone. After a brief conversation explaining Mila's behavior, she hung up with a nod. She's sending an officer around to the back of the house, just to be safe. She says we can go out once they confirm there's no one there. Minutes later, a young officer appeared in their backyard, giving them a thumbs up after checking the perimeter. Mark cautiously opened the door, keeping Ollie behind him. The moment the door opened, Mila bolted outside, but didn't run far. She stopped about 20 feet from the house, looking back at them expectantly, clearly wanting them to follow. I'm going to see what she wants, Mark decided. You two stay here with the officer. No, Daddy, Ollie protested. We should all go. Mila wants to show all of us. Grace hesitated, torn between caution and curiosity. The officer, sensing her dilemma, offered a solution. I'll stay with you if you want to follow the dog, ma'am. It might be important. Decision made, Grace nodded and took Ollie's hand. Stay close to me, she instructed as they stepped outside. Mila led them across the yard toward a corner near the back fence where a small garden patch lay dormant for the winter. When they reached it, she began to dig frantically, soil flying between her paws. What's she doing? Ollie asked, watching in fascination. The officer had followed them, his hand resting casually near his holster. Dogs sometimes bury things, he explained. Bones, toys, or evidence, Mark added quietly, watching as Mila's digging became more focused. After a minute of frenzied digging, Mila's paw struck something solid. A metallic sound rang out as she scraped against an object buried in the earth. She looked up at them, whining urgently. Mark knelt down, using his hands to widen the hole Mila had started. His fingers soon touched something cold and hard. There's definitely something here, he said, carefully brushing away more soil. The object gradually took shape, a small metal box, roughly the size of a thick hardcover book. It was rusted in places, but appeared to have been buried relatively recently. Is it treasure? Ollie whispered, eyes wide with excitement. The officer stepped forward, suddenly all business. Sir, I need to ask you to stop digging. This could be evidence in an ongoing investigation. Mark withdrew his hands immediately. Of course. The officer radioed for Detective Harper, while Mila sat beside the partially unearthed box, her job apparently done. Her intelligent eyes moved between the humans and the box, as if making sure they understood the importance of her discovery. Detective Harper arrived 20 minutes later, bringing with her a crime scene technician who carefully excavated the box using proper evidence collection techniques. The family and Mila watched from the porch as the technician photographed, measured, and finally lifted the box from its hiding place. I need to take this in for processing, Detective Harper explained, approaching them with an evidence bag containing the dirt-covered box. But before I do, I want to ask, did any of you bury this? All three shook their heads. We've only lived here for 2 years, Mark explained. We didn't bury anything in the garden. Harper nodded, her expression thoughtful as she studied Mila, who hadn't taken her eyes off the box. It's quite extraordinary that she knew exactly where to look, she commented, almost as if she buried it herself, Grace finished for her. Is that possible? Mark asked, glancing at the German Shepherd with newfound wonder. Dogs have been known to bury important items, Harper replied, and German Shepherds are particularly intelligent. If this box contains something related to Lily's disappearance, then Mila brought it here for safekeeping, Grace whispered, the implications dawning on her, and came back for it when she needed help. Ollie, who had been listening intently, knelt beside Mila and wrapped his arms around her neck. You're the smartest dog ever, he declared, making the adult smile despite the tension of the moment. Detective Harper handed the evidence bag to the technician. I'll need to take this to the lab immediately, but I'll let you know what we find as soon as I can. In the meantime, I'd suggest staying vigilant. If Miller was after Mila and she led him here, she didn't need to finish the thought. The implication was clear. Miller might return, more determined than ever to find whatever Mila had hidden. "We'll increase the patrol frequency," Harper assured them, seeing the worry on their faces. "And I'll fast-track the analysis of this box's contents." After the detective and her team left, the family returned inside, a new sense of urgency hanging over them. Mila seemed more relaxed now, as if having accomplished her mission, but she still positioned herself where she could watch both the front and back doors of the house. "What do you think is in the box?" Ollie asked as Grace prepared lunch, his imagination clearly running wild. "I don't know, sweetheart," she answered honestly, "but whatever it is, it must be very important to Mila and might help find her owner." The afternoon passed slowly, each hour stretching as they waited for news from Detective Harper. Mila divided her time between watching the doors and checking on her puppies upstairs, her maternal instincts never faltering despite the high-stress situation. Around 4 o'clock, Grace's phone rang. It was Harper, her voice tight with controlled excitement. "We've opened the box," she said without preamble. "Mrs. Crawford, this is bigger than we thought. Much bigger." Grace put the phone on speaker so Mark could hear. "What was inside?" "Documents, photographs, a USB drive," Harper listed. Lily Mercer wasn't just a veterinary technician. According to notes we found, she was gathering evidence against a local animal breeder she suspected of abuse and illegal practices. The breeder's name? James Miller. Mark and Grace exchanged shocked glances. "The same man who tried to break in," Mark said. "The very same," Harper confirmed. The USB drive contains video footage of horrific conditions at his breeding facility. Malnourished dogs, unsanitary conditions, evidence of dogs dying from neglect. And something else, financial records suggesting he was selling dogs to a research facility that was recently shut down for ethics violations. "So Lily was building a case against him," Grace said, the pieces falling into place. "And he found out." "That's our theory," Harper agreed. There was also a journal entry dated the day before she disappeared. She wrote that Miller had confronted her, threatened her. She was planning to take her evidence to the authorities the next day. "But she never got the chance," Mark concluded grimly. "No," Harper sighed. "But she was smart. She must have given the box to Mila to hide, maybe even trained her to bury it somewhere safe if anything happened. German Shepherds are capable of remarkable feats when properly trained." Grace glanced at Mila, who was watching her with those knowing eyes. "And when she escaped from Miller, pregnant and injured, she came straight here to retrieve the evidence." "Exactly," Harper confirmed. "Based on this evidence, we've obtained an emergency warrant for Miller's property. A team is heading there now. And Mrs. Crawford, the wound on Mila's side, the vet who examined the photos believes it came from a tracking chip being forcibly removed." Grace gasped. "He cut out her chip so she couldn't be identified if she was found." "Yes, Miller clearly didn't want anyone connecting the dog to Lily, but he underestimated Mila's intelligence and loyalty." After promising to update them as soon as the search of Miller's property was complete, Harper ended the call, leaving the family to process this disturbing new information. "Mila isn't just a dog," Ollie said with absolute certainty as he stroked her fur. "She's a hero." Looking at the German Shepherd who had risked everything to bring evidence to light and potentially save other animals from abuse, Grace couldn't disagree. "Yes, she is, sweetheart. A true hero." As evening fell, bringing with it a sense of foreboding, they decided to stay together in the living room, none of them wanting to be separated. Mark pulled out the sofa bed for Ollie, while Grace brought down Mila's puppies in a laundry basket padded with blankets. Despite being less than 48 hours old, the puppies were already showing distinct personalities. Toby bold and active, Willow quiet and gentle, Sunny resilient and curious, and little Luna vocal and determined. They tried to maintain a sense of normalcy for Ollie's sake, watching a movie and making popcorn, but the adults couldn't help checking their phones constantly for updates from Detective Harper. None came. "Maybe no news is good news," Mark suggested as they prepared for bed, though his attempt at optimism fell flat. They were just settling in when Mila suddenly stiffened, her head snapping toward the front window. A low growl rumbled in her throat. Mark moved to the window, carefully peering out through a gap in the curtains. "I don't see the patrol car," he reported, his voice tight with concern. Grace's heart dropped. "What?" "It was supposed to be there all night." Before Mark could respond, the power went out, plunging the house into darkness. Ollie let out a frightened whimper, "It's okay, buddy," Mark assured him, his voice calm despite the circumstances. "Just a power outage from the storm." But there was no storm, and they all knew it. This was deliberate. "Grace, take Ollie and the dogs upstairs to the bathroom," Mark instructed, already moving toward the kitchen where they kept a flashlight. "Lock the door and call 911. Grace didn't waste time arguing. She scooped up the basket of puppies while Mila stuck close to Ollie, guiding him through the darkness with surprising precision. They made it halfway up the stairs when a crash from the back of the house told them someone had broken in. "Go!" Mark hissed, appearing at the bottom of the stairs with the flashlight and a large kitchen knife. "I'll hold them off." "Mark, no!" Grace pleaded, but he was already turning toward the sound of footsteps. Mila let out a sharp bark, then bounded down the stairs past Mark, disappearing into the darkness toward the intruder. Snarls and a man's startled shout suggested she had found her target. "Mila!" Ollie cried, trying to turn back. Grace kept him moving, her heart pounding as she urged him toward the bathroom. Once inside, she locked the door, placed the puppies in the dry bathtub for safety, and called 911 with shaking hands. "Break-in in progress," she whispered to the dispatcher. "My husband and our dog are confronting the intruder. Please hurry." The sounds from downstairs were chaotic, growling, shouting, furniture overturning. Then came the worst sound of all, a gunshot, followed by a pained yelp that could only have come from Mila. Ollie's face crumpled. "Mila's hurt," he sobbed. Grace held him close, tears streaming down her own face as she silently prayed for her husband's safety and for the brave dog who had already endured so much. The dispatcher's voice seemed distant as she assured Grace that officers were on their way. More shouting came from downstairs, then the unmistakable sound of sirens approaching. Relief flooded through Grace. Help was coming. But had it arrived in time? The next few minutes stretched into an eternity as Grace and Ollie huddled in the bathroom, listening to the commotion downstairs. Finally, a knock came at the bathroom door. "Grace? Ollie, it's me. You can come out now." Mark's voice, tired but alive. Grace flung open the door to find her husband standing there, disheveled but unharmed. "Oh, thank God," she cried, throwing her arms around him. "Where's Mila?" We heard a shot. Mark's expression was grim. "Miller got her in the shoulder. The police have called an emergency vet. They're taking her now." "Is she—" Grace couldn't finish the question. "She's alive," Mark assured her. "She's a fighter, Grace, and she saved my life tonight. Miller had a gun on me when Mila attacked him. She gave the police enough time to get here." Ollie pushed past them, racing down the stairs despite their calls to wait. They found him in the living room, where paramedics were treating a bleeding Mila on the floor. 2 officers were handcuffing a middle-aged man with a beard, Miller, presumably, while others secured the scene. "Please don't let her die," Ollie begged, kneeling beside the injured German shepherd. "She's my friend." The paramedic, a young woman with kind eyes, looked up at the boy. "We're doing everything we can for her, sweetie. She's very brave." Mila's eyes were open, but glazed with pain. When she saw Ollie, her tail moved in a weak thump against the floor. Even injured, she seemed more concerned about the boy than herself. Detective Harper arrived as the paramedics were carefully lifting Mila onto a stretcher. "The puppies?" she asked immediately. "Upstairs. They're safe," Grace assured her. Harper nodded, relief evident on her face. "Good. And I have news. We found Lily Mercer." The family froze, afraid to hope. "Is she—" Mark began. "Alive," Harper confirmed, a smile breaking through her professional demeanor. "Injured and malnourished, but alive. Miller was keeping her in a cabin on his property. When we arrived with the warrant, our K9 unit led us straight to her. She's on her way to the hospital now." The joy of this news was tempered only by concern for Mila as the paramedics carried her out to a waiting vehicle. "Can we go with her?" Ollie asked desperately. "I'll take you to the vet clinic myself once we've secured the scene," Harper promised. "But first, we need to get these puppies to their mother. They need special care while she's being treated." As they gathered the puppies and prepared to follow Mila to the veterinary hospital, Grace couldn't help but marvel at the extraordinary chain of events. A dog's desperate plea at their door during a storm had led to the rescue of a missing woman and the exposure of a criminal operation, all because they had listened when Mila asked for help. The vet clinic was a flurry of activity when they arrived, with Mila already in surgery. A veterinary technician helped them set up the puppies in a warm incubator, explaining that they would need to be bottle-fed until Mila could nurse them again, if she survived. The words hung in the air, unspoken but felt by all. Would Mila, after everything she'd endured to save her owner and bring a criminal to justice, survive this final ordeal? As they settled in for a long night of waiting, a nurse from the human hospital called with news that Lily was awake and asking about her dog. When told of Mila's injury, she insisted on being brought to the veterinary clinic despite her own condition. Against medical advice, but with a sympathetic doctor's grudging permission, Lily was transported by ambulance to be reunited with her beloved companion. Would Mila pull through surgery to see her beloved owner again? And what would become of the brave German shepherd and her puppies once this ordeal was over? The waiting room of the veterinary clinic felt like a world suspended in time. Grace and Mark sat with Ollie between them, the boy clutching the small carrier containing Mila's 4 puppies. Detective Harper paced nearby, occasionally stepping outside to take calls about the case that had broken wide open with Miller's arrest. The surgery had already been underway for over an hour when the doors to the clinic opened and a wheelchair was pushed in by a nurse. In it sat a thin woman with short brown hair and hollowed cheeks, the unmistakable signs of someone who had endured weeks of captivity. Lily Mercer? Harper stepped forward immediately, her professional demeanor softening at the sight of the woman's frail condition. The woman nodded weakly, her eyes scanning the room anxiously. "Where's Mila? Please, I need to see her." Grace approached the wheelchair, introducing herself and her family. "She's in surgery right now," she explained gently. "The bullet hit her shoulder. The veterinarian says she has a good chance, but—" Lily's eyes filled with tears. "She found you," she whispered. "She actually did it." Her gaze fell on the carrier in Ollie's lap. "Are those—" Ollie stepped forward, opening the carrier so Lily could see the puppies. "Mila had babies at our house," he said proudly. "This one's Toby, and that's Willow, and the little one is Sunny, and this noisy one is Luna." A sob escaped Lily as she reached out to touch the tiny creatures. "She was pregnant when I disappeared. I was so worried." She looked up at the family, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you for saving her, for understanding what she was trying to do." "She's very special," Mark said, placing a hand on Ollie's shoulder. "She protected our son like he was her own." Lily nodded, not surprised. "German shepherds are incredibly loyal, but Mila is exceptional even for her breed. I trained her for search and rescue work before I became a vet tech. That's how she knew to bury the evidence box and come back for it when she needed help." "Can you tell us what happened?" Harper asked gently, pulling up a chair beside Lily's wheelchair. "How did you end up at Miller's property?" Lily took a deep breath, gathering her strength. "I'd been documenting conditions at his breeding facility for months, posing as a potential customer interested in purebred puppies. What I saw there, it was horrific." She shuddered at the memory. Dogs kept in tiny cages, sick and underfed. Females bred until their bodies gave out. I reported him to animal control twice, but he always managed to clean up enough before inspections. "So you decided to gather evidence yourself," Harper prompted. Lily nodded. "I couldn't stand by and watch those animals suffer. I collected documentation, took photos, recorded conversations where he admitted to selling dogs to that research facility. Then, about 3 weeks ago, he confronted me at the park while I was walking Mila." Her hands trembled as she continued. "He knew what I'd been doing. Threatened me, said no one would believe me over him. He has connections in the county government. I told him I was going to the state authorities the next day with everything I had. That's when he—" Her voice broke. "You don't have to continue if it's too difficult," Grace said softly. But Lily shook her head. "No, I need to tell this. He attacked me, tried to take my phone. Mila defended me, but he had a stun gun. He used it on her, then on me. When I woke up, I was locked in that cabin on his property." "And Mila?" Ollie asked, his young face serious. "He took her too. He knew she was valuable, a trained German shepherd, and being pregnant made her even more valuable to a breeder like him." Lily's expression hardened. "But he underestimated her intelligence and loyalty. She must have escaped, retrieved the evidence I'd taught her to hide, and brought it to you. At great risk to herself," Mark added, thinking of the wound where her microchip had been removed. Lily nodded, tears streaming down her face now. That's why I need her to survive. She's already sacrificed so much." As if in answer to her plea, the door to the surgical area opened, and a tired-looking veterinarian in scrubs emerged. Everyone turned, holding their breath. "Dr. Adams," the receptionist said, "this is Lily Mercer, Mila's owner." The veterinarian approached, his expression carefully neutral. "Ms. Mercer, I understand you've been through a terrible ordeal yourself. I'm Dr. Adams. I've been treating Mila." "Please," Lily begged, gripping the arms of her wheelchair. "Just tell me if she's alive." Dr. Adams's face softened into a smile. "She's alive and stable. The bullet damaged muscle tissue but missed major arteries and bones. We've removed it and repaired the damage. With proper care and rest, she should make a full recovery." The collective relief in the room was palpable. Ollie let out a cheer while Grace and Mark embraced. Lily covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "When can we see her?" Lily asked when she'd composed herself. "She's in recovery now, still under anesthesia," Dr. Adams explained. "But I can allow a brief visit, just her owner for now. She'll be groggy when she wakes up, and familiar scents will help keep her calm." The nurse began to wheel Lily toward the recovery area, but she stopped, turning back to the family who had saved her beloved dog. Would Ollie come too, just for a moment? Mila clearly formed a bond with him. It might help her. Dr. Adams hesitated, then nodded. Briefly, and just the boy. Ollie looked to his parents, who gave their permission. He carefully handed the puppy carrier to Grace and followed Lily and the nurse through the double doors. The recovery room was quiet except for the soft beeping of monitoring equipment. Mila lay on a padded table, her shoulder heavily bandaged, an IV line running into her foreleg. Despite her ordeal, her chest rose and fell in steady breaths. "Mila," Lily whispered, reaching out to gently stroke her dog's head. "I'm here, girl. I'm safe. We're both safe now." At the sound of her owner's voice, Mila's eyelids fluttered. Her tail moved in the slightest thump against the table. "Mila, it's me, Ollie," the boy said softly, standing on tiptoe to see her better. "Your puppies are okay. They miss you." The German shepherd's eyes opened fully at this, finding Ollie's face. Recognition sparked in her gaze, and her tail moved again, more deliberately this time. "See," Lily said through fresh tears. "She knows you. You're part of her family now, too." After a few precious moments, the nurse indicated it was time to let Mila rest. As they left the recovery area, Lily turned to Ollie. "Thank you for taking care of her when I couldn't. You and your parents are heroes." Ollie shook his head. "Mila's the real hero." Back in the waiting room, Detective Harper had news to share. "Miller is talking," she informed them. "Trying to cut a deal? He's admitted to kidnapping Lily and stealing Mila, and he's implicated 2 county officials who were helping him avoid inspections in exchange for kickbacks." "Will he go to prison?" Mark asked, his arm protectively around Grace's shoulders. "Without question," Harper confirmed. "Kidnapping, animal cruelty, attempted murder, obstruction of justice, the list goes on. He won't see freedom for many years." "And the animals at his facility?" Lily asked urgently. "Animal control has seized all of them. Over 30 dogs, most in terrible condition, but salvageable with proper care. They're being distributed to shelters and rescue organizations." Lily nodded, relieved but clearly exhausted from her ordeal. The hospital nurse approached, concerned about her patient's fatigue. "Ms. Mercer needs to return to the hospital now. She has a long recovery ahead of herself." "Wait," Lily said, reaching for Grace's hand. "The puppies, Mila won't be able to care for them properly while she's recovering. Would your family be willing to foster them until she's stronger? They know you already." Grace looked to Mark, who nodded without hesitation. "Of course we will," she assured Lily. "And you'll always be welcome to visit them at our home." "Thank you," Lily whispered, tears spilling again. "For everything." As the nurse wheeled Lily out to the waiting ambulance, Detective Harper turned to the family. "You should all go home and get some rest. It's been a traumatic few days." "Will you call us if there's any change in Mila's condition?" Grace asked Dr. Adams, who had rejoined them. "Absolutely," he promised. "But I don't anticipate any problems. She'll likely be ready for discharge tomorrow or the day after. She's remarkably resilient." The drive home was quiet, each of them processing the events that had turned their lives upside down. The next few days established a new routine. Mark returned to work at the hospital, while Grace took extended leave to care for the puppies, which required around-the-clock feeding. Ollie appointed himself official puppy monitor, checking on them constantly between sessions of online school. Mila was released from the veterinary hospital 3 days after surgery, her shoulder heavily bandaged, but her spirit undiminished. Dr. Adams delivered her to the Crawford home himself, where Lily was waiting, having been temporarily discharged from the hospital to be reunited with her dog. The moment Mila entered the house, she made a beeline for the laundry basket where her puppies were nestled, despite her injury. She inspected each one thoroughly, licking them and whining softly in greeting. The puppies, recognizing their mother's scent, squealed with excitement. "She's checking to make sure they're all okay," Lily explained, watching from the couch where she was recovering. "Making sure you kept your promise to protect them." "We did our best," Grace said, sitting beside her. The two women had formed a bond during Lily's daily visits to see the puppies while Mila was hospitalized. Though I think Ollie might have spoiled them a bit. The boy in question was stretched out on the floor beside the basket, watching the reunion with shining eyes. "They missed you, Mila," he told the dog earnestly. "Especially Luna. She cries the most at night." Mila turned to look at him, and then, to everyone's amazement, she gently picked up Luna in her mouth and carried the tiny puppy over to Ollie, placing her in his lap before returning for the others, one by one. "She's sharing them with you," Lily said, her voice thick with emotion. "She trusts you that much." Over the next few weeks, both Lily and Mila grew stronger. The media picked up the story of the heroic German shepherd who had saved her owner and exposed an animal cruelty ring, and donations poured in to help with Lily's medical expenses and support the rescued animals from Miller's facility. Lily, who had lost her apartment during her captivity, accepted Grace and Mark's invitation to stay in their guest room while she recovered, allowing her to be close to Mila and the growing puppies. The arrangement benefited everyone. Lily had support during her recovery, and the Crawfords had an expert on hand to help with the increasingly active puppies. As the puppies reached their 1-month milestone, thriving under the care of both their canine and human families, Lily brought up the subject they had all been avoiding. "I'll be well enough to return to work soon," she said one evening, as they all sat in the living room, watching the puppies tumble over each other and play. "And I've found an apartment that allows pets." A heavy silence fell over the room. The unspoken question hung in the air. What would happen to Mila and the puppies? Ollie, sensing the tension, wrapped his arms around Mila's neck. The German shepherd, now fully recovered except for a slight stiffness in her shoulder, leaned into his embrace. "I've been thinking about this a lot," Lily continued carefully, "about what's best for everyone." "We understand if you want to take Mila and the puppies home with you," Grace said, though the thought of saying goodbye to the dogs who had become part of their family was painful. "They're yours, after all." Lily shook her head. "That's just it. I'm not sure it's that simple anymore." She looked at Mila, who was dividing her attention between Ollie and her playing puppies. "Mila chose your family when she needed help. She trusted you with her babies. That creates a bond that can't be ignored." "What are you saying?" Mark asked cautiously. "I'm saying that I'm not going to separate Mila from people she clearly loves," Lily explained, "or from a little boy who saved her puppies and welcomed her into his heart." She smiled at Ollie, who was watching her with wide, hopeful eyes. "So, I have a proposal." The arrangement they worked out was unconventional, but perfect. Mila would live primarily with Lily, who needed her emotional support as she dealt with the trauma of her captivity. But she would spend weekends and holidays with the Crawford family, maintaining her bond with Ollie and keeping tabs on her puppies. As for the puppies, it was Ollie who came up with the solution. "Willow can stay with us," he declared. "Toby can go home with Lily so Mila won't be lonely. Sonny can go to Grandma and Grandpa's farm, where he'll have lots of space to run. And Luna—" He hesitated. "What about Luna?" Grace prompted gently. Ollie looked at Detective Harper, who had become a regular visitor after the case closed. "Officer Bennett really likes Luna," he said thoughtfully, "and she could train her to be a police dog like her mom was supposed to be." The adults exchanged surprised glances at his insightful suggestion. When approached with the idea, Officer Bennett was overjoyed, having already formed an attachment to the vocal little puppy during her visits. By the time the puppies were 8 weeks old and ready to go to their new homes, the extended family created by Mila's desperate plea for help had grown even larger. Lily had started a foundation to help rescue and rehabilitate abused animals, using the publicity from her ordeal to raise awareness. Detective Harper and Officer Bennett had become close friends with the Crawfords, often joining them for Sunday dinners. And most importantly, Mila had healed completely, not just physically, but emotionally. The once desperate, frightened dog, who had appeared on their doorstep during a storm, was now confident and content, secure in the knowledge that she had two loving homes and an extended family that would always protect her and her children. On the day when the puppies officially went to their new homes, they gathered for a family photo. The Crawfords, Lily, Detective Harper, Officer Bennett, and all 5 dogs. As they posed together, Mila sitting proudly in the center with her puppies around her, Grace remembered that stormy night that had changed all their lives. "You know," she said to Lily as they watched Ollie playing with Willow afterward, "when Mila showed up at our door that night, I was afraid to let her in. I almost turned her away." Lily smiled, watching the German Shepherd who had risked everything to save her. "But you didn't. You listened when she asked for help, and that made all the difference." "Mila chose us," Ollie declared, joining the conversation with the wisdom that had continuously surprised the adults throughout this journey. "She knew we would listen. She knew we would help her save her family." Looking at the extraordinary dog who had brought them all together, Grace couldn't help but agree. Some things in life couldn't be explained by logic alone. Sometimes you simply had to trust the wisdom of a desperate mother who would do anything to protect those she loved. As Ollie curled up with Mila and Willow for one last nap before the puppies went to their new homes, his small hand buried in Mila's fur, he whispered something that summed up their extraordinary journey perfectly. "Every hero needs someone who believes in them. I'll always believe in you, Mila." And in that moment, surrounded by the family that fate and a brave German Shepherd had brought together, they all knew that this wasn't an ending, but a beginning, of friendships, of healing, and of a love that had started with a desperate plea at a door on a stormy night. If you were touched by Mila's incredible journey of bravery and loyalty, please like, share, and subscribe. And we'd love to hear in the comments, what would you have done if a desperate animal showed up at your door during a storm? Has an animal ever changed your life in an unexpected way?